All right, everybody, welcome back to Bio 107, Module 14. This is our last module of the semester, so we made it. This is just part one. This is a two-part lecture. The second part of this particular module lecture falls on the last day of our class. Thank you all for hanging in there with me virtually, and today we're going to talk about evolution and society. So the readings for this module is fairly quick, only 5 pages, and they fall on pages 265 to pages 270. So go ahead and get that reading knocked out so that way you're all ready for our Module 14 quiz. Now our Module 14 quiz we'll talk about is a little bit different than the past quizzes, hopefully a little bit easier for you. So let me just remind you of the assignments that are due. Our Human Evolution Lab number 13 is due on Tuesday, May 5th. Make sure you're completing the new version that I provided. Also, the Module 13 quiz is due on Tuesday, May 5th, so get that turned in. And then lastly here, our Module 14 quiz is going to be due on Thursday, May 7th. So this is considered a take-home quiz. This is just because it is a lot shorter than our previous quizzes. It is a fill-in-the-blank, approximately 4 answers, I believe, and they're short response. So make sure you're writing and having time to write the responses for this quiz. I did already assign our final exam. That is going to be due May 13th, not May 12th. Sorry, I erroneously said May 12th in a previous lecture and email. It is going to be due May 13th at midnight. I will accept it. So this is going to be a take-home final. Remember, I've attached it. 4 questions, long response essay. I gave you all a little bit longer than a week to get that completed. And the first 2 questions are comprehensive. The second 2 questions are long response. Just a reminder, if you want to turn in extra credit, this is our last extra credit assignment of the semester. You're reading a chapter under Module 13 and writing a 1-page essay response in regards to the chapter, who was the first person. Make sure you answer all of these prompts. Make sure you write who was the first person in a way that I understood that you read the chapter. Also, I would like for you to critique the essay and then just honestly write a review on what you thought. 5 points extra credit. Take it or leave it if you want it. It might help someone get a few extra credit points here. If you've been doing extra credit, I offered a total of 20 extra credit points for the semester, even with the cancellation of the last Planetarium Kaler lecture series visit. So this is our last set of extra credit points. Think about turning it in. Just let me know and send me an email. Okay, so our final exam is our take-home final. Remember, 4 questions. It is a writing assignment, so give yourself time for that. Try not to do it on the last day. This is going to be due on May 13th, not May 12th. So May 13th by midnight, please turn that in so I can have enough time to grade it. So for our Module 14 reading today, today's lecture is going to be pretty short and sweet. The readings are pages 265 to 270, and we're talking all about evolution and modern-day society. So that's going to encompass a lot of trials that we had over the course of the last century, and so we'll go through all of that starting in the 1920s. All right, so along with our evolution in society, there is the debate on whether creationism or evolution should be taught in school. So this has a lot to do with teaching of these 2 theories here, or sciences, so to speak. So for both of these 2 sciences, there's been a lot of battle within the courts, and so there's been several cases. And so we're going to touch on each of the cases. I believe there are 5 that we're going to talk about over the next 2 lectures, and we're going to watch a little short video on each of them. Some of them are more fun than others, but just that way we know a little bit more about the history and why we are at the place in time we are at today. So the first case here, we have the state of Tennessee versus John Scopes. So this case occurred in 1925, and it's also known as the Scopes Monkey Trial. In this particular case, Scopes was a teacher who was accused of illegally teaching evolution. And he was represented by lawyers, lawyer William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow. So those two folks were his lawyers. And since he was accused of illegally teaching students about evolution, the ruling ended up being that Scopes lost the case because the law itself, at least the judge, ruled that the law itself did not uphold the alternative means as an origins to life. So they did not, the law didn't say that evolution was the alternative means aside from creationism. He was fined, I believe, approximately $100, which was quite a lot of money back in that day. But later on down the line, his fine was reversed, and he didn't have to pay that fine due to a technicality that happened. So on the next slide here, we're going to watch a 6-minute long video. It is a video that is found on Comedy Central, but if you are like me, you enjoy these because you learn a little bit of history with a little bit of comedy. And this is all about the Scopes Monkey Trial in the version of the drunk history on Comedy Central. So we'll play this. It's very accurate, and we'll let this run for 6 minutes and enjoy. So there you have it. There's the drunk history version of the Scopes Monkey Trial. Pretty entertaining. Oop, okay. So the next trial that comes down the pipeline here is the Epperson versus the state of Arkansas. So this trial occurred in 1968. So in 1928, this law revolved around the trial revolved around the 1928 law of banning the teaching of human evolution. And so the administrators of a school adopted a biology book that forced teachers to teach evolution. But there was this 1928 law banning teachers from teaching evolution. So then this particular trial went to court. In the end of this trial, the jury ended up deciding that the First Amendment did not protect against the rights of the state to push a religious agenda. And so we're going to watch a short video on this particular case as well, only I think about 2 minutes long. But it's a really worthwhile video here. All right. Oh, it's 4 minutes. Very enthusiastic music.
Epperson versus Arkansas was a United States Supreme Court case that took place in 1968 concerning the constitutionality of banning the teaching of evolution in schools. The United States courts were not unfamiliar with cases of this type at the time. In fact, the Tennessee Supreme Court had a very similar and widely publicized trial that you may be familiar with, the Scopes Monkey Trial. The basis of this trial was very similar to Epperson versus Arkansas. In 1925, the Tennessee State Legislature passed the Butler Act, a law banning the teaching of evolution in schools funded by the state government. The main reason that it was actually passed was because all of the legislators of the state assumed that the governor, a very progressive man, Austin Peay, would veto it, so they didn't fight against it. But in order to gain the support of the more rural citizens, he didn't veto it. The bill got signed into law, but was quickly challenged by the American Civil Liberties Union as being in violation of free speech and a government endorsement of religion. Long story short, given that Tennessee was an extremely fundamentalist Christian state, the Tennessee Supreme Court ended up upholding the law, banning the teaching of evolution in the state. Fast forward to a bit later. Susan Epperson, a young woman who graduated from Arkansas's school system, was employed at Little Rock in 1964 to teach 10th grade biology at Central High School. At the start of her second year of teaching, she was confronted by a new textbook. She faced a dilemma. She was meant to teach using the new textbook, but because the textbook covered topics of human evolution, it would be a criminal offense to do so. Also, teaching evolution from the book could be grounds for her dismissal. Because she didn't want to lose her job or be prosecuted for teaching, she decided to challenge the constitutionality of this law on the grounds that it violates the First Amendment, endorsing the religious viewpoint of creationism rather than the scientific, secular view of evolution. In the end, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Epperson's favor, overturning the controversial law. In the court's opinion statement, Justice Abe Fortas explains the court's reasoning. The sole reason for the Arkansas law is that a particular religious group considers the evolution theory to conflict with the account of the origin of man set forth in the book of Genesis. The First Amendment mandates governmental neutrality between religion and between religion and non-religion. The Arkansas law is not a manifestation of religious neutrality. Although this case did prohibit the banning of evolution, this case did not solve everything when it comes to scientific education. There are currently two main anti-evolution methods of teaching that are being used. One method is that whenever evolution comes up in education material, it has to be labeled as an unsupported theory, simply because it is a theory. This is flawed because almost every principle in science is a theory, but that doesn't mean that they are unsupported. For example, gravity is just a theory, but you would find it quite difficult to deny the fact that gravity does in fact exist. Similarly, evolution has mountains of data behind it, but still, this is used as a legal way to discredit it in public education. A second way evolution is still being discredited is that it is being taught alongside intelligent design, the idea that all living creatures were created by a higher power. They are presented as equal theories, but evolution has huge amounts of evidence, while intelligent design has essentially none and therefore should not be present in a scientific classroom at all. Although Epperson versus Arkansas has not affected these anti-evolution measures, it was still a landmark case in scientific education, making it unconstitutional for legislation to ban the teaching of evolution, allowing everybody to be properly educated in the field of science.
Alright, so that was a great video discussing how the state had to remain neutral and separation of church and state, and not increasing the scope of any one particular religion by endorsing that in schools. Also, it mentioned theories. So I mentioned in the beginning creationism and evolution as both theories. Everything that we talk about are theories, but like the video mentioned, there is mass amounts of evidence to support that theory. So very unique case on Epperson versus Arkansas. Okay, so let's keep moving onwards here. So now we're in the 1980s. So it's crazy to think that that last case just occurred in the 1960s. So that was happening within the last century. But now we're discussing the McLean versus Arkansas Board of Education here. So in 1982, this is when this case went to trial here. As a result of the Epperson case that we just discussed in the last slide series, the creationists went to teach creationism and evolution as an equal theory, so side by side, as that video mentioned. So if you teach evolution, you must also teach creationism or vice versa. And so just laying all of those out. Or intelligent design, or whatever you'd like to discuss it. Now, make sure you guys are watching that video in intelligent design that I assigned and sent the link out for. It's an hour and 50 minutes. That was for your lab this week, so make sure you do watch that. But it's an award-winning PBS Nova documentary, so it should be really relatively interesting. Anyway, so this particular case ended up ruling that the creationism is not a valid scientific theory. It is a religion, a specific religion based in the realm of Christianity. And so this case was lost by the Arkansas Board of Education here. And so we're going to watch one more video on this particular case from the 1980s in Arkansas. 1980s, that's crazy to me that this just happened a few short years before I was born. Okay, so this is a professor discussing the McLean and Arkansas case. It's only about 3 minutes long, so we're going to go ahead and get that queued up for you.
That was a very interesting case where the state of Arkansas had passed a law requiring that if teachers taught evolution, they had to teach creation science to balance it out. And I'm glad you mentioned that case, because people don't know it very well, but it was a wonderful, wonderful example of science, really, because the people who challenged the Arkansas law, the lead plaintiffs were religious leaders, by the way. The Reverend Bill McLean was the named plaintiff of McLean versus Arkansas. And of course that was done deliberately to try to defuse the idea that this was about science versus religion, because it really wasn't. It was about one claim of science versus everybody else. And mainstream religion leaders like Reverend Bill McLean, who was a Methodist minister, and Methodist, Presbyterians, Catholics, etc., didn't like the idea of creation science being taught in the public schools because that wasn't their theology. And they'd have to straighten the kids out on Saturday and Sunday about what their own theology was. So they fought these equal time bills very strongly. But the McLean case was really a wonderful case for science, because the plaintiffs and the defense brought in these teams of scientists, creation science on one side and straight mainstream science on the other side, and they debated whether creation science was science. And it was a long trial. Several days of testimony, and of course a whole long period of months and months of depositions and the whole business, and then finally the cross-examinations. And when the dust settled, the judge wrote his decision that it was clear from the evidence presented by the mainstream scientists and not rebutted by the creation scientists, and the evidence presented by the creation scientists but destroyed by the mainstream scientists, that creation science wasn't a science at all. Evolution was obviously strong science, acceptable science, but creation science was just religion masquerading as science, and because of the Establishment Clause of our First Amendment, was unconstitutional to teach it. Now, unfortunately, the creationists lost so badly in that case, they never appealed it. And so a neighboring state of Louisiana had also passed equal time for creation science legislation, and that bill was the one that went all the way to the Supreme Court. But unfortunately, without that wonderful trial where the creationists and the evolutionists squared off to debate what is science. And so we didn't get that wonderful court record into the national case, which was actually argued much more narrowly on documents.
Awesome. So basically, the McLean trial was pastors or religious representatives saying that, okay, we don't want creationism to be taught in the schools because these teachers are not teaching it how we want to teach it, and so now we have to reteach it in Sunday school or Saturday school or whatever day you guys would, or whatever day that the students would go into church to be taught. And so that is all I have for this particular lecture. Like I mentioned, it was a short lecture. The next lecture here, the last lecture of our semester, I have a few more cases we're going to discuss, and then we'll call it a wrap. So all right, so stay tuned for my next video.